Welcome to the Sissy Training Institute, a fictional academy devoted to feminine refinement, etiquette, and posture. Our stories are works of fiction, created to inspire confidence, grace, and self-expression. But every lesson shared here, from behavioral training to beauty routines, is real and empowering. Viewer discretion is advised. The morning began like any other. Sunlight spilling across polished floors, the faint scent of lavender polish clinging to the air. I was arranging the breakfast tray when Mistress's voice broke the calm. "Stop," she said. Not loudly, but her tone was the kind that froze the room. I turned at once, setting down the teapot carefully. Her gaze, cool and sharp, was fixed on me. "Come here, Lily." I curtsied and stepped forward, heart already racing. She circled me slowly as she always did during morning inspection. But this time, her silence felt heavier. Her eyes moved from my gloves to my apron to the hem of my skirt. Then she stopped. "Lift your skirt slightly," she said. I obeyed without hesitation, gathering the fabric between trembling fingers. "There," she murmured. "Do you see it?" I looked down. The right edge of my satin hem, only by half an inch, had come undone. A loose thread, small but visible, curled against the pale pink fabric. My breath caught. I didn't notice, Mistress." Her hand came to rest lightly beneath my chin, tilting my face upward. "And that," she said softly, "is precisely the problem." I swallowed hard, shame burning behind my eyes. "A maid's eye," she continued, "must see what others overlook. If I must tell you that your uniform needs repair, then you are not serving me. You are waiting to be corrected." "Yes, Mistress," I whispered. She released my chin and walked toward her desk, every movement graceful but firm. "You will take the uniform to Madame Lefevre's Atelier this afternoon. I will not have you represent this house with even a single imperfection." "Yes, Mistress." Her tone softened only slightly as she added, "And you will wear it as it is. Let her see the flaw, so she may see what happens when diligence slips." I nodded, bowing my head deeply. "Of course, Mistress." "Good, you will curtsy to every word she speaks, and you will not return until she is satisfied." When she turned away, I felt the sting of correction settle deep inside me. Not as anger, but as lesson. A single loose thread had unraveled my composure, and Mistress had seen it instantly. As I left the room, I whispered to myself, "Perfection must not wait until morning inspection. It must live in every breath." By midday, the air outside shimmered with sunlight, warm enough that even the polished stones of the courtyard seemed to glow. I left the manor quietly, the faint sound of my heels on the path echoing behind me, like a reminder of Mistress's tone that morning. Each step carried the weight of her disappointment, and yet also her expectation. The walk to town felt longer this time, though the path was familiar. My basket was empty save for a folded note sealed with Mistress's wax crest, a letter of introduction for Madame Lefevre. I held it tightly as I approached the main street, where the shop fronts gleamed with fresh paint and polished brass. Madame Lefevre's Atelier stood out immediately. The window display was a small museum of elegance, a mannequin in a silk gown, another in a crisp maid's dress with pearl buttons, ribbons draped artfully across the background. The glass reflected my own image faintly, uniform perfect, apron newly pressed, ribbons shining, and yet I could still see the flaw, that tiny uneven hem, mocking me. I drew a steady breath and pushed open the door. A small brass bell chimed above me, soft but precise. Inside, the world smelled of fabric and lilac starch. Bolts of lace and satin filled the walls, arranged in soft gradients of ivory, rose, and cream. Behind the counter stood a tall woman with silver hair coiled neatly at the nape of her neck. She looked up from her work, measuring tape draped effortlessly around her shoulders. Her eyes, sharp but not unkind, moved from my polished shoes to the bow at my collar. "You must be Mistress Devereux's maid," she said at last, voice low and smooth. I curtsied immediately. "Yes, madame. Mistress sent me for uniform correction." I held out the sealed letter with both hands, careful not to wrinkle the paper. Madame Lefevre took it, broke the seal neatly, and read it in silence. Her lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. I see. She expects precision, as always." "Yes, madame," I murmured, eyes lowered. She moved from behind the counter, her movements flowing with practiced grace. "Stand there by the mirror," she instructed, gesturing with one slender hand. I obeyed at once, positioning myself in the center of the room. The mirror before me reflected not just my image but my posture, my nerves, my resolve. Madame Lefevre began to circle me slowly, her gaze sharp and calculating. The sound of her heels clicked softly against the polished floor as she examined every seam, every pleat, every bow. "The stitching is fine," she said finally, "but the hem has loosened. It suggests haste." I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. "Yes, madame, it was my neglect." Her eyes met mine in the mirror. "Then today," she said softly, "we shall fix the cloth and the habit." I lowered my head. "Yes, madame." The atelier was quiet, except for the soft hum of distant sewing machines and the faint rustle of fabric as Madame Lefevre moved. She circled me with deliberate care, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, from the slope of my shoulders to the bow at my waist. I could feel her gaze, steady and assessing, but I did not dare move. "Chin up, shoulders back," she murmured. "Yes, that's better. Now, breathe naturally. Posture should never look forced." "Yes, madame," I whispered, adjusting as she instructed. She nodded faintly, then stepped closer. Her gloved fingers brushed the edge of my sleeve, tracing the line of the seam. "Mistress Devereux trains you well," she said, half to herself. "But she is right. The hemline has slipped. And here," she gestured lightly toward my waist, "the corset could use a tighter draw. A maid's silhouette should never soften. It must hold." I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. "Yes, madame." Her tone remained calm, but her movements were precise, almost surgical. She lifted the fabric of my skirt between her fingers, examining the stitching. "You see," she said, "fabric speaks. It tells whether its wearer is careful or careless. Yours tells me you have been diligent but distracted." The words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. "I should have noticed the thread sooner," I murmured. She paused, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "You are not being punished, child. You are being perfected." Her expression softened for the briefest moment before returning to its quiet focus. She adjusted the hem delicately, the sound of her scissors faint and rhythmic. The metallic snip, snip, snip echoed like a heartbeat in the room. "Still," she said quietly, "do not fidget. When a maid is examined, she must become like marble, graceful, silent, and steady." I froze, eyes fixed on the reflection before me. My breath slowed, matching the soft rhythm of her work. When she finished marking the hem with white chalk, she stepped back, studying me from a distance. "Good. You're learning already." The compliment felt like sunlight breaking through cloud. I curtsied instinctively, even though she hadn't asked me to. Madame Lefevre allowed herself the faintest smile. "We shall proceed with the measurements. Do not fear being seen, Lily. Every true servant must one day learn how it feels to be studied." I bowed my head. "Yes, madame." And though my heart still fluttered beneath my corset, a calm pride began to bloom beneath the nervousness. This was not humiliation. It was craftsmanship. and I was both the work and the lesson. The room had fallen into that particular kind of silence that only exists in places of discipline, not empty, but full of intent. The faint ticking of a wall clock mingled with the soft whisper of fabric as Madame Lefevre drew her measuring tape from around her neck. "Stand at ease, but do not slouch," she instructed, her tone calm and absolute. "Hands at your sides, eyes forward." "Yes, madame," I breathed, fixing my gaze on the mirror before me. The measuring tape brushed softly against my arm as she began. It was cool at first, then warm as it moved, coiling and uncoiling in practiced rhythm. The faint shh of the fabric sliding against satin filled the air, a hypnotic sound that seemed to slow time itself. "Bust, waist, hips," she murmured under her breath, calling out numbers to her assistant, a quiet young woman who stood near the work table jotting notes in a leather-bound book. The sound of the pencil scratching against paper echoed faintly in the stillness. "Your posture has improved already," Madame said, her voice low but approving. "You are learning that stillness can be more powerful than movement." I felt the faintest smile pull at my lips. "Yes, madame." She continued to work, measuring the curve of my shoulders, the length from neck to hem, the circumference of each sleeve. Her hands were steady and sure, neither harsh nor indulgent. Each touch was purposeful, a language of fabric and form. When she reached the hem again, she crouched slightly, marking points along the edge with white tailor's chalk. "You see this line?" she asked. "It should rest perfectly parallel to the floor. It tells the world that the woman inside understands balance, both in cloth and in conduct." Her words lingered in my mind long after she moved on. The assistant brought over a small basket of pins, which Madame used to secure the fabric near my waist. "The fit must be closer," she said, adjusting the corset line. "Tighter, but never cruel. A maid should breathe, but elegantly." "Yes, madame," I replied softly, my breath controlled, the faint pull of the fabric reminding me to stay perfectly still. As she stepped back to observe, her eyes softened. "Better," she said quietly. "Much better. You are beginning to stand as though you were born to serve, not forced to." The words sent a warmth through me, pride and humility all at once. When the last measurement was taken, Madame placed the tape neatly on the table and straightened. "You may rest your hands now, Lily," she said. "You have held still beautifully." I released a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The mirror reflected the faintest flush on my cheeks and the steady calm in my eyes. I curtsied to her deeply. "Thank you, madame." She inclined her head slightly, a quiet acknowledgement that the lesson was far from over, but that I had passed its first test. Once the measurements were taken, Madame Lefevre moved with silent precision, gathering her tools as though beginning a ritual she had performed 1,000 times. She selected a spool of pale thread, nearly invisible against the satin, and motioned for me to remain by the mirror. "Do not move from this spot, Lily," she said calmly. "The way you stand is part of the lesson. If I adjust the cloth while you shift your weight, it will never hang properly." "Yes, madame," I answered softly, clasping my hands in front of me. The soft snip of her scissors filled the air, followed by the faint sound of pins being drawn from their cushion. She worked methodically, lifting and smoothing the hem, pinning it into perfect alignment. Every so often, she would step back to examine the balance, her expression unreadable. "Your mistress was right," she said after a moment. "A loose hem is not merely a flaw in thread, it is a symbol. It says, 'I did not look closely enough.' And a maid," she continued, placing another pin delicately, "must see everything." The words struck deep. I felt the weight of them in the stillness of the room, in the tension of standing motionless while the pins clicked softly into place. When she began to adjust the waistline, she stepped behind me, The faint tug of the fabric drew my posture straighter. "Better," she murmured. "Feel that. The uniform corrects you as much as you correct it." "Yes, madame," I whispered. "Do not speak unless necessary," she added gently. "Words can unbalance the body." I swallowed, nodding silently. For several minutes, the only sounds were the rhythmic whisper of thread, the soft scrape of chalk, and the quiet breathing between us. She tightened the corset slightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to remind me that elegance was not comfort. When she finished, she smoothed her hand along the back of the dress. "Now," she said softly, stepping back. "Look." I turned toward the mirror. The uniform seemed transformed. The hem now floated evenly just above my knee. The bodice fit more perfectly to my frame. The ribbons sat with mathematical precision. It was the same uniform, yet it wasn't. "Do you see?" she asked. "When the garment is corrected, it commands respect. It asks for none, yet receives it. That is how a maid must stand." My reflection met her gaze in the mirror, and for the first time I understood what Mistress meant when she said that presentation was a form of obedience. "Thank you, madame," I said quietly. Madame Lefevre gave a small nod. "Do not thank me, child. Thank your uniform. It is your teacher." I smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on the mirror. "Yes, madame." When Madame Lefevre finished the last stitch, she stepped back and folded her hands, studying me in the mirror with quiet satisfaction. The atelier was hushed now, golden light spilling through the tall windows and catching in the fine dust that floated lazily through the air. "Now," she said softly. "Walk." I hesitated only for a second before obeying. The click of my heels echoed lightly across the polished wood. The fabric swayed around my knees, weightless, balanced, not a thread out of place. I turned just as she had shown me and curtsied before the mirror. The reflection that looked back at me no longer felt nervous or unfinished. The hemline now traced a perfect line. The waist hugged cleanly. The bow at my back sat precisely centered. I stood taller, not from vanity, but from a new understanding. Every adjustment, every correction had reshaped me as much as the dress. Madame Lefevre circled me once more, her expression thoughtful but approving. "You see, Lily," she said quietly, "uniforms are not merely worn, they are earned." "Yes, madame," I murmured. She gestured toward the mirror again. "Tell me what you see." I hesitated, glancing at my reflection. "I see a maid ready to serve, madame." She tilted her head slightly, smiling faintly. "And what do you feel?" I swallowed softly, the answer forming before I realized it. "Proud and grateful." Madame Lefevre nodded. "Good. That is the balance your mistress cultivates. Humility before her, pride in your craft. Remember this moment because every task you complete, every curtsy, every polished floor, they all begin here, with discipline made visible." Her assistant approached quietly and placed the finished garment card on the table, noting the corrections. Madame signed it with a graceful stroke of her pen, then turned to me once more. "You may go now, Lily. Tell your mistress the work is complete. But understand, the stitching may hold, yet you must be the one to keep it strong." "Yes, madame." I curtsied deeply, bowing my head until the satin brushed my knees. "Very good," she said. "Now off you go, and do not forget. The world sees the maid before the woman. Make sure what it sees is worth respect." Quoi? As I stepped out of the atelier and into the fading afternoon light, the wind caught the skirt of my dress. It moved like silk and sang softly in the breeze. I felt different, not simply repaired but refined. Every line of my uniform reminded me of her words. Earned, not worn. By the time I reached the manor again, the afternoon sun had faded into a soft golden haze. The gravel crunched beneath my polished shoes as I walked up the front path, my newly tailored uniform swaying perfectly with each step. The skirt moved like water, weightless even, elegant. Inside, the familiar scent of the house welcomed me. Lavender, beeswax, and faintly rosewater. I paused in the hall to catch my breath before knocking gently on the drawing-room door. "Enter," came Mistress's voice. She sat by the window, the light catching the pale silk of her gown. Her gaze lifted as I curtsied deeply, my hands steady, my head bowed. "You have returned," she said. "Stand up, Lily, let me see." I rose slowly, hands folded before my apron, and waited as she inspected me. Her eyes traveled from my polished shoes to my hemline, up the curve of my waist, along the fitted seams, and finally to my face. "Turn," she commanded softly. I obeyed, taking a slow step to spin gracefully in place, the skirt swaying in perfect rhythm. When I faced her again, she nodded once. "Better," she said, voice calm but satisfied. "You hold yourself as you should. Madame Lefevre's work is exquisite, but I can see she has done more than mend a uniform." "Yes, mistress," I said, barely above a whisper. "She taught me what it means to wear it properly." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Indeed. You wear it now as though it belongs to you, and you to it." I felt my chest tighten with a strange warmth. "Thank you, mistress." She stood, circling me once just as Madame Lefevre had done. "The hem is perfect," she murmured. "The waist refined, but it is your bearing that pleases me most. You walk differently now, as though you understand that grace is not something you perform, but something you are." The praise was quiet but absolute. I curtsied again, deeply this time, my eyes lowered. "I will not forget this lesson, mistress." "See that you don't," she replied gently. "Perfection is not a destination, Lily. It is a daily discipline." She paused, studying my reflection in the tall window. "From now on, your uniform inspection will take place each evening, before supper. If there is a single flaw, you will report it before I do. Understood?" "Yes, mistress." "Good." She turned back toward her desk, dismissing me with a graceful motion of her hand. "You may go." As I backed away, curtsying once more, her voice followed softly. "You have done well today, my dear. You look exactly as a maid of this house should, composed, precise, and quietly proud." When I stepped back into the hall, I caught my reflection in the mirror. For the first time, I didn't see a girl trembling beneath expectation. I saw a maid who had earned her place. Every stitch, every breath, every movement told the same story, one of patience, correction, and grace. And I smiled softly, knowing Mistress would see it later and know it was well deserved.